Marta, just the legend, the reinvigorated, maybe the midfielder of the year, the MVP finalist Marta for the Orlando Pride, this team that she has played for years and years and years, and she's finally going to go to her first championship game. She takes the ball down, she makes 2 defenders miss, she rounds the keeper, she slots it in. That is some magic. That moment is like, that's why you become an NWSL fan. That's why you become a women's soccer fan. That's why Marta is the best of the best, right? Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. It is Monday, November 18th, and we have a whole lot of soccer to talk about. We're first going to talk about the U.S. Women's National Team roster that dropped this morning. Going to talk about the ins, the outs, the absences, the surprises, kind of what I think Emma Hayes is thinking going into this big trip to Europe to play against England and the Netherlands. And then we're going to do a recap of a fantastic NWSL semifinal round. All eyes towards championship weekend this weekend. Is going to be a blast. Let's dig in. All right, so big soccer week in the United States. This is like the news after the news or the news before the news. We're actually going to start with, we're looking ahead beyond NWSL championship weekend. We got to think ahead, hurry up and wait, right? The U.S. Women's National Team November roster is here. This schedule is kind of crazy. So while teams are playing for the NWSL championship on Saturday night, this upcoming weekend, the U.S. Women's National Team will already be traveling to camp in England. Those players that are on both the camp and these championship game rosters will then join the team after that game is played. No rest for the weary. It did actually influence some of the decisions on this roster, which we'll discuss. But basically what's happening for the U.S. this year is they get through the NWSL. Many of these players who play in the NWSL play for the U.S., as people know. Not exclusively. There are some Europe-based players who are on this roster as well. But many of them are kind of doing this big push. They play in the NWSL playoffs. They immediately go to Europe for this kind of big 2-game stint to play England and the Netherlands. And then they get December off, then the big exhale, and they don't have to come back into U.S. camp until January when they do that futures camp and January camp. So it's kind of, you get through all of this, you play these 2 games, and then congratulations, you get a little bit of a reprieve at the very end of the calendar year. That has influenced some of Emma Hayes' choices here. And I think it's also kind of, we're going to talk a little bit about where the U.S. is and how that's reflected in some of these selections as well, because the U.S. is in this interesting position where they don't have a major tournament next year. They don't have something like the Euros, like the teams that they're playing do. And they don't have World Cup qualifying, I think, until the following year, until 2026. So they do have time. They have some time to look at kind of weakness points and also just not to worry too much about chemistry on their strength points. So let's dig into this. I'm going to read the full roster here and then talk about the big headlines and then dig into kind of what I think Hayes is doing here, some of my analysis. So for goalkeepers, Mandy Hott, Fallon Tullis-Joyce, and Alyssa Nair. Defenders, Tierna Davidson, Emily Fox, Ava Gaetino, Naomi Girma, Casey Kruger, Alyssa Melanson, Jenna Neiswanger, Emily Sams, and Emily Sonnet. Midfielders, Corbin Albert, Sam Coffey, Hal Hirschfeld, Lindsay Horan, Rose Lavelle, Lily Johannes. We'll talk about that. And then for forwards, Yasmin Ryan, Emma Sears, Ali Sentnor, Jaden Shaw, Alyssa Thompson, and Lynn Williams. So big points maybe starting with absences, and then we'll talk about selections. Triple Espresso, the big 3 of Mallory Swanson, Trinity Rodman, and Sophia Smith are getting this international period off. It's not just that they are tired, which they all are. I think there are other players on this roster who you might also say are tired, who have had, a long stints with the U.S. and played a lot for the U.S. and played a lot for club. But all 3 of these players are kind of dealing with different knocks, right? Sophia Smith has that ankle injury that was kind of re-aggravated in the quarterfinal that Portland lost. After that game, head coach Rob Gale said that she's been dealing with that off and on since arriving back from the Olympics. She hasn't been training that much. She needs the break, right? You've got Trinity Rodman, who will be giving it a go in this upcoming championship game, but she clearly has been having some lingering effects of this lower back tightness and trying to get those spasms to subside. And I think like rest and relaxation is so important for that kind of injury. The U.S. is not going to risk that. So Rodman is going to empty the tank this weekend and then have a nice period off so that she can recover and start feeling better for the beginning of next year. And then Mallory Swanson, a little bit less clear exactly. I mean, Swanson did not, she didn't appear on the injury report before the quarterfinal that Chicago played. But as we all know, she is still coming back. She comes back from a catastrophic knee injury. She's someone she had kind of a shoulder issue and late in the regular season. She's someone who I think it just doesn't make sense to risk if you don't have to. And she also carried the load, as people will recall, the last international break. She was the one member of that crew that did actually play in those 3 games in October. So the team's going young. They're giving this, so it's kind of this mixture of these players were relied on very, very heavily in the Olympics. They all played in the NWSL playoffs. They're all dealing with certain different knocks, and it makes absolutely no sense from a position of strength to risk them or run them into the ground for this particular international break, which is a little bit different maybe than what some people expected because the competition is going to be so high. And Hayes herself said that she wanted to have a group that really could compete in these games. This wasn't going to be quite as much of a discovery camp or an evaluation camp as the October friendlies. But we're going to see a little bit of that. Though, however, it's like 15 players from the Olympic squad. So it's not a complete revamp. It's more just, and this is kind of my opinion, I think that Hayes is less concerned about the team's positions of strengths and is using this particular window to figure out what she can retool with what I think people perceive to be the team's weaknesses, most notably the midfield and the whoever is going to be the successor for Alyssa Nair. I think she's ID'd kind of goalkeepers and midfielders, and she's going to let these young attackers kind of go out and be fearless and do their best. Because it is a position of strength. I think Hayes, we talked about this in the last international break. I think it's true this time as well. Hayes, because they won that Olympic gold, the pressure is off a little bit more. They're in a really good position to actually make these evaluation periods, to actually make the player pool healthy and work on the style of play. Because if the Olympics had not gone well, there would have been probably a greater emphasis on, quote unquote, showing that progress now, right? Progress has been shown, the stamp has been made, the US wins a major tournament, and you have less of an impact of being like, okay, we have to beat England or we have to beat the Netherlands. And I think moving from that position of strength, Hayes did herself, right, by sort of emptying the tank in Paris this summer. Some of her words, she had a call with the media today, and she said, I want to make sure that players like Swanson and Rodman and Smith are prepared for a long time to come. And when you're in the back end of a season and you're playing a lot and your body's tired, your mind's tired, that's where it sometimes can become risky, end quote. What she's referring to is things get slower, tackles get heavier, your stride changes, your ability to do explosive movement changes. The mind being tired is just as dangerous as the body being tired. And then she says kind of the roster overall, she says, I've developed rosters over a long period of time. They don't improve just by having them on the roster. We have to give them the opportunities to do that. I have no fear whatsoever to be able to put out a very different team if that's what we choose to do against England, because I think that players are demonstrating, and she shouts out Alyssa Thompson and Emma Sears and Ava Gaetino, they're demonstrating that they deserve opportunities to be seen again. So basically what she's also saying is if these players never play these high quality teams, how will we ever know if they're ready? I think that's a great approach to take. And again, it comes from a position of strength. It comes from how well the U.S. has done in 2024. Which takes us back to our positions of weaknesses for the team, right? And midfield and goalkeeper. And we're going to highlight a couple players here because I think that these are the players that fans are really excited to see. It does feel like that natural rotation and a couple big wins in the player pool for the United States. I think the one that everyone has kind of discussed is Lily Johannes. So I've talked about her on the show multiple times. Was actually, this is kind of an interesting thing. She wasn't a dual national yet. She had the possibility of becoming a dual national for the United States or for the Netherlands. She was living in the Netherlands for a number of years. She played in the Netherlands. There was the possibility of going through that process. But instead, she's decided to play for the U.S. Women's National Team. She made that announcement on her own social media. It was about a week ago. It was before this roster was named, maybe around the time the roster was being selected. She made the announcement that she wants to commit to playing for the U.S. Women's National Team. And the way that Hayes referred to that today, she says, and Hayes has been very hands-off, at least publicly, in saying she wants Johannes to make that decision on her own. Johannes is only 17 years old. You don't want to pressure a player. That's not how you get them into the system, right? What Hayes said today about Johannes coming out and saying that she would like to play for the United States, she said the camp she came into in May was such an enjoyable one for her that she'd been thinking about that ever since, and she really wants to progress now with her international career. I think there are two salient points here. I think obviously the first one is that Johannes had a good experience, and that's awesome. And as everybody knows, she played very well. She scores in her first start. She looks like a natural in that midfield. It seemed like she also meshed well with the personalities, which you absolutely love to see. But there's also a salient point, I think, from Hayes, and this is where you get into the pressure of where, no, I don't think Hayes was pressuring Johannes to make this decision, but that line of she really wants to progress now with her international career does feel like, well, yeah, you kind of have to make a commitment if you want the team to start investing in you, right? And the team can make all the promises and bring her in and make her feel comfortable, but if Hayes is going to have this player as part of her vision for 2027, that does kind of have to start now, because Johannes is 17. I'm sure they're hopeful that when 2027 rolls around and she's 19 or 20, that she feels really, really comfortable. And you can't be worried about, is this player going to play in this friendly? Can she get into a competitive game? How many games can she play? Obviously, this roster, they're playing against the Netherlands, so it would have made sense for her to be a part of this roster if she was not committed to one of the two teams. And I think it's all I mean, like, I think everyone, it's a huge win, right, for the United States. Not only did Johannes come to this decision herself, it seems like, and Hayes kind of maybe slightly encouraged her to make that call now, got through the Olympics without her, which I also think is really valuable. You needed those leadership points in the midfield. You saw the other parts of the young core, again, that triple espresso, which they don't now, they can take a bit of a back seat for a little bit. And Johannes is a great get. As young as she is, you don't want to put too much pressure on any individual player. And it is not just Johannes plays so well, but that she's moving into a position that has not necessarily been a huge position of strength for the United States over the last couple of years. She plays as a connecting midfielder. She's very good on the ball. She's very good at breaking lines with her passing. She's got great pace. She's got great field vision, and she can score if she needs to. And this is kind of the role that has been held down by Lindsey Horan for the last couple of years. Lindsey Horan, who will be 33 years old in 2027. And it's sort of this nebulous idea that has never really been stamped down by the United States following the injury to Sam Mewis, the untimely retirement of Sam Mewis. And there is this hope that Johannes might be, again, not too much expectations, but she could grow into being a Mewis type player, which was able to unlock a lot of the styles of play that the United States have struggled to replicate in recent years. The U.S. is thin at this role, and she appears to be a natural, and she's someone who will hopefully only grow in effectiveness with more time and more camps and getting to know her teammates better and connect better. And maybe the dream is that you have a player like Johannes, who I think she'll be like 19 at the beginning of the World Cup and 20 at the end of it, working into being a confident either role player or starter by the time that tournament comes around, because that, again, even is not just for the future of this cycle, but for cycles to come. And it's a great camp for her to make her like first official decided appearance in, because this attacking line is young, right? They are putting these other young players on the line here and saying, go do this, go sink or swim. There is that freedom, again, won by the Olympic gold. And so you look at the young attackers that Johannes is going to be in camp with, someone like Sentner, who's had a fabulous year, both with Utah. She was a Rookie of the Year finalist, and with the U20s. She had a very good World Cup with the United States U20s this year. You have Alyssa Thompson in Sears, where it's not their first camp, or it's for Alyssa Thompson, like not her first camp back. They got into games. They were scoring goals for the team in October. There's that added level of comfort. And it's just a good mix of these young players and these veterans. You know, the front line is not completely youngsters, right? You've got Lynn Williams, who obviously is a really well-established veteran of this team and is going to be very good at holding standards. You've got Yasmin Ryan, who is a very established professional at the very least, and is someone who I think did well and deserved another look. I think it's kind of notable who did or did not make it back into camp from these October camps, were a little bit of a wider net. So I think it's a good mix, and there's still obviously a ton of talent and veteran leadership in that midfield. I'm really curious to see the combinations that Hayes is going to choose, whether she's going to put someone like Johannes in with some of the established starters, or if it's going to be more of a like, let's get all the young players in there and see how they do. Those building those connections is so important, and Hayes seems like such a connection focused manager. I'm just fascinated to see how they're going to approach that, and also, again, how they're going to balance playing against teams that haven't looked their best. As people know, England didn't look great in the last international period, but who have formidable midfields of their own and who have formidable attackers of their own. And how do you get that balance right of the sink or swim of these younger players while also not discouraging them too much, especially because you are holding back on some of the talent level that's going to be staying home. Also interesting, the goalkeepers, right? I think Tullis Joyce, there were lots of calls from fans to get Tullis Joyce in the mix. Last camp, as we know, the victory tour of it all didn't necessarily allow for that. Makes sense for her to get her first camp in England, where she is stationed with Manchester United. Makes perfect sense to me. Easy for travel. I hope she gets in a game, quite honestly. I think that would be fantastic to see how she plays against European competition. I do think PTJ and Hot getting called in does feel like the team isn't just auditioning backups. It feels like they really are trying to find that right fit for someone who could truly be a successor to Nair. I think it's really interesting that Casey Murphy was left home. She was healthy. This is not an injury issue. But I do wonder if just Hayes is looking for just kind of that right mentality, that right tenacity, or just some fresh eyes on how the goalkeeping pool can continue to grow for the United States. Because as we know, Nair is fabulous, but she is a player that is going to have to find a successor eventually. And I think that Hayes is doing a good job of kind of, again, focusing in on these different parts of the team that still need development. And then maybe those points of strength. I mean, as you see, the defense didn't really change much at all, but these points of strength, like the attack, being like, okay, well, we know what our plan A is, right? So how do we make this stronger, and how do we develop these players for 27, 28 in these years to come? These games are going to be trial by fire. I think that's good. The teams that they're playing have a major tournament next year. They're on a much shorter timeline, and things are getting serious for them. Going to be learning experiences for all of these teams. I actually thought there were tons of positives the last time the U.S. played England. They didn't win, but I just think they learned a lot. I just remember Sophia Smith and Trinity Rodman in that game and just being like, I think there's something there. And ultimately, it took a little bit longer maybe than U.S. fans were hoping for, but they finally got there in 2024. Obviously, that Spain game, which was the last time, that was the second game of that twofer, did not actually reveal anything particularly interesting about the United States, but I do think U.S. versus England, big Wembley game. I love it. I think it's fabulous for the sport. I think both teams learn a lot from playing each other. And it's going to be really, really fun to watch. So good roster. I hope everyone stays healthy. And I appreciate the way that Hayes is managing minutes and personalities, and kind of seeing different players and getting different players in, because I do think that's how you keep everyone healthy long term. Which, yes, that's looking forward with the U.S. Women's National Team roster. But I think we also need to take a second to talk about just what bonkers action we saw in the NWSL this weekend. The semifinal round delivered. It was so good. Both of these games were so close. They were so interesting. You saw individual brilliance. You saw interesting team tactics. You saw sold out crowds in Washington, D.C. You saw over 14,000 people in Orlando come to watch that game. This has been the season of the top four, which at times has been very exciting. At times has been, frankly, a little boring when the scheduling was a little bit lopsided, right? But it all comes down to this weekend, where you get these four teams who are so close in measure and in talent and in coaching ability and the way that they like to play, that you just had two firecracker games to get to the championship game this weekend. This weekend had everything, right? It had set piece bangers. It had sold out crowds. It had a red card in extra time, and Emily Sonnet and Trinity Rodman argued about it. It had 3 saved penalties by Aubrey Kingsbury. It had like a sliced opener by Dabinia in the other game. Barbara Banda scorching a hole in the back of the net. It had Marta making all of us like want to cry with this moment of brilliance by the legend who has been so revitalized by this Orlando team. What a testament to the top 4 talent this year that these games were so good. The results were, as we said, we get into the postseason. Results matter a lot. Washington advances in PKs against Gotham, and Orlando holds on 3-2 against Kansas City. So we are getting number 1 versus number 2 in the championship game. Maybe always destined to be that way. I went 1 for 2 with my predictions. And I think perhaps, we'll get a little bit deeper into the actual matchup between Orlando and Washington a little bit later in the week. That's the nice thing for the late week recording. But I do think some of these tactical thoughts about the semifinal round will inform some of those predictions. Let's go back to game 1, which again, Gotham versus Washington. This is in Washington, D.C. I thought Gotham, maybe momentum-wise, have a little bit more of an edge. They get their game done in regulation, whereas, Washington had to go to extra time against Bay FC, just in terms of players that are available and just what I thought Gotham might be able to do defensively would outlast what Washington was able to do in the attack. Just again, kind of tired legs. I wasn't so as this game played out, and it was very end to end from the very beginning. Gotham comes out really on the front foot, then Washington adjusts. The visitors score first, and then Washington equalizes at the death. It was a really good game that did kind of feel like it was going to come down to who would tire first. And even that for Washington, I do think just comes down to mentality and kind of. It's so exciting to watch this Washington Spirit team And there are shades of it that really remind me of 2021, which, as people might know, was the year they did win an NWSL championship. Now, that was a very different team, very different year. The 2021 NWSL season was very much a pandemic recovery season. You saw teams kind of struggle to get a huge foothold. There was a lot of stuff obviously going on behind the scenes in terms of the scandals that were coming out about the league. And then you had Washington that also had like additional forfeits, and they were in an ownership battle. And that stuff is not the same. Nothing is the same about any of that. But when you look at the on the field product, the youth and like the vitality and the intense mentality of the Washington Spirit, that never say die attitude that almost kind of has like a youthful abandon to it, is really, really impressive to me. And I really feel like that is what made the difference in this game. In terms of the actual play, both teams were finding a lot of space on the wings. I was not surprised that both goals scored in regulation came off of service from wide. Gotham scores first with Esther. She gets a nice goal at the beginning of the second half. It's a set piece actually off of a free kick that's sent into Hal Hirschfeld to get the equalizer late, and Hirschfeld almost actually wins the whole thing 2-1 in regulation. I think you saw individual performances. I thought Rose Lavelle was fantastic in this game. In another losing effort, it was really kind of striking to watch some of her heroics last year for the Seattle Reign in the championship game that fell just short, and kind of seeing her heroics in this game that fell just short, and feeling very lucky that we've gotten a couple years of just Rose Lavelle playing some of her best football, even if it doesn't always end in a championship trophy. The Washington Spirit rookies, just really fabulous. And we didn't know if this was going to be the case, especially when you have two coaches, right? You have this tandem of the interim coach of the early end of the season, and then you have the permanent coach come in later in the season. That can make something kind of choppy for these rookies, right? But their development has been really steady. In terms of the actual game itself, I'm kind of bouncing around because there's just so many emotions to it. But the game itself, you have to say that Rose Kouassi and Lacey Santos for the Spirit were so good. I think I underestimated what a boost it was going to be to get Kouassi back in this round after she served that suspension in the quarterfinal round. Santos has been so clutch for this team after losing Croy Bethune in the attacking midfield. And again, just sort of that never say die attitude, and also just sticking with what you do best, right? I was talking about the wings and how well the Spirit were doing on the wings, and kind of that battle on the outside that they were having with Gotham, and that results in a red card. I mean, you look at something like that and you think, oh well, that was Brunina kind of losing her head. Defender Brunina, she gets her second yellow in extra time for a rough tackle on Trinity Rodman. But no, it's like that is developed through pressure after pressure after pressure on the wings. Finally, the outside backs make a mistake. And then once Gotham goes down to 10, it really just felt like they were deflated. And I think that was kind of indicated by their penalties that they took. They get all three saved by Aubrey Kingsbury. They all are kicked to the exact same place. And if you look at the body language there, especially Jenna Neiswanger, who took the last one and had it saved, there's kind of a feeling of shock, maybe disbelief, but also maybe just resignation. The game just was not in their favor as you went further and further into extra time. And I'm really excited by this Washington Spirit team. I don't know what happens next weekend, but they made some ambitious moves in the offseason. They took, Sam Staub goes out to Chicago. You've got Ashley Sanchez, who goes out to North Carolina. They make some changes, some real significant changes, and they have some real significant injuries. And I was even just thinking, like, how cool is it that Lena Solano is such a core member of this group, even just when it comes to like her boost off the bench, or the fact that she was able to score one of those PKs, right? Like, that's awesome. These players that they're finding in the draft and the players that they're signing from overseas are all coming together to make this concoction that is just so difficult to take down. Even when, again, someone like Rodman, you can kind of tell that she's sort of hurting. We talked about that in the US segment. They can lift her up. They can stand up and make a difference even when they have players go down. So impressed with Washington. Gotham, question marks, right? Not really about how good they are. I think we know exactly how good they are. They had an incredible season. They look much better than they did last year. I just think the level went up for all of these four teams. But I do think it's a disappointment. I said this at the end of the regular season. Gotham had the super team, no Shield. Gotham had the super team, no NWSL championship, right? And I think fans of the team should be very proud of what they accomplished. And I think there were many, regular season games where if you were a Gotham fan, I bet you felt like you were on the top of the world, but nothing to show for it, right? So do you need more changes, or do you just need the ball to bounce your way? I think is the question that Gotham has going into this offseason, because I am always curious with the roster as stacked as that one. Is there necessary change, even just in playing time? It's a real stacked roster. Maybe players want to go somewhere else where they maybe will have like a more starting role, right? Very curious to see. But Fabulous season from Gotham, falling just short. Very impressed with the Spirit. And then on Sunday, another, game that makes you romantic for the sport of soccer, despite it being actually kind of choppier and less precise than the Epic on Saturday. It wasn't as good of a game. You didn't actually see probably Kansas City at their very best. You didn't really see Orlando at their very best. It felt a little bit more like a game that you would see in July than a game you'd want to see in November. But the thing that I really liked about this game, kind of like cosmically, is that it felt like time after time after time, it punished teams for being conservative and rewarded them for being brave. It felt like low lines of contention were punished anytime a team kind of fell back in and let the defense sit and let the space out wide be taken and not kind of push the ball forward and possess or attack. That's when they would concede. I think that's what we saw in Kansas City getting the opener, which was a really nice ball in from Michelle Cooper. If Kansas City wins this game, we're talking about Michelle Cooper up and down for an entire week and just the improvement that she's made in from this year, from last year. Dabinia has this nice slicing ball, a tough angle. They get the opener, very similar actually, right to the beginning of Washington's Gotham, where the visitor strikes first. It really felt like it was a bright start for Kansas City. They were moving the ball well. But Orlando comes right back, dancing to the end line with Allie Watt. Haley McCutcheon finishes. It's 1-1, going to halftime 1-1. Good game, back and forth. Every team is like trying to do what they do best. Again, the more they fall back, the more they fall out of their game. Tempo is like a point of contention where some teams want to go fast, some teams want to go slow. The second half, things start to go wrong for Kansas City. They have to pull Lola Bonta because she was dealing with a knock. And the substitution that Vlatko Andonovski makes is he puts on Nichelle Prince, who is a very attacking-minded midfielder. She's a forward who has kind of been converted into sort of a tweener type attacking midfielder. That forces Vanessa DiBernardo to sit a lot deeper, more like a number 6, which is something she has done in the past. We saw that in Chicago. I think, again, specifically talk about 2021. She did that a lot more in 2021. But she's less comfortable sitting back. She was not comfortable on the ball. The turnovers in the defensive midfield became a big problem for Kansas City. Turnovers off of the defensive line became a big issue for Kansas City. And then Orlando just scores 2 really, really nice goals. Kayla Sharples, unfortunately, gets turned on both of them. First, Barbara Banda, who just sends a rocket in. Really nice touch just to put it out of Schultz's reach. There was a lot of time for Orlando to get that ball in. Again, the lower the line of contention, you got to step. If you don't step, you're going to get burnt. And then Marta. Oh, what can we say about this Marta goal? It's like I just want to show it to you over and over and over again. It starts with an interception, right? It starts with Barbara Banda getting a key interception off of Sharples. And then Marta runs into the space and grabs the ball. Now, Banda was given an assist for that, and I'm glad. There was like a moment there where you don't know if it's an interception or a pass. I am glad that's an assist because this goal does not happen without that intervention by Barbara Banda. And then Marta, just the legend, the reinvigorated, maybe the midfielder of the year, the MVP finalist, Marta, for the Orlando Pride, this team that she has played for years and years and years. And she's finally going to go to her first championship game. She takes the ball down. She makes 2 defenders miss. She rounds the keeper. She slots it in. That is some magic there. That is like what it's all about. When you do this job, you start to really try to think about things analytically, right? And of course, you have your emotions get raised and you like to see cool things and you're basically just hoping that everyone is their best self. But you sometimes lose those moments when you watch as many sports or as many games as I do. But that moment is like, that's why you become an NWSL fan. That's why you become a women's soccer fan. That's why Marta is the best of the best, right? And that ultimately ends up being the game winner. Kansas City, if you look at the stats, Kansas City's XG or their pressure looks very similar to Orlando's over the course of the whole game, but Kansas City also doesn't really wake up until they're down 3-1. They do finally get a handball call out of that late pressure. DiBernardo sinks it. The game ends 3-2. They just didn't get Chawinga involved early enough or often enough. Again, it just felt like Kansas City was a little bit too conservative. They lost the midfield in the second half, and that ended up being, the ball game. So what to say about Kansas City, right? I think also disappointed. They're going to be disappointed. It's going to feel like a wasted opportunity, certainly, to host themselves in a championship game. I think they were very excited about the prospect of that. I think it's going to feel, they win the Summer Cup, right? Like they do have these wins throughout the season and they play much better and it's a really nice roster and they play lovely football and their striker wins the Golden Boot and I think is going to win MVP. Like there are really good things out of this season for Kansas City. But ultimately a missed opportunity to play for a title at home. Maybe you just say like they lose one less game and maybe they don't have to play Orlando in a semifinal, right? Or They don't have, they don't run a player like Lola Bonta into the ground, or they make different balance changes to their defense or to their midfield or anything like that to kind of get that final piece together to play for a championship. But it's like big and little. You almost want to, condemn a team like Gotham or condemn a team like Kansas City because they're so talented and they're not making it all the way to the end. But also, this was a season of the top four, and 1 and 2 made it, and someone has to lose these games, and it turned out to be the visitors. That's just the way it goes sometimes. So I loved the semifinal round. This is like the payoff for like a whole good season of soccer. And I think this game between Orlando and Washington is going to be similarly awesome. We've got a lot of star power, 2 very good coaches, 2 teams with a lot of mental resolve, 2 teams with a lot of players up for end of the year awards. It's going to be fun. I hope everyone is going to check it out. If you can't make it to Kansas City, I hope you watch it on TV, because this is just what it's all about. All eyes to championship weekend. So that has been today's edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. Shout out to producer extraordinaire Parker Fenton. We will be on site championship weekend this weekend. If you see us, please say hi. We'll have a lot more good content for you. We're going to be there for Media Day. We're going to be recording podcasts, talking about it. Just sign up for the JWS newsletter. So follow our YouTube channel. Just if you don't follow us on our channels, please hop onto the train, because we're going to have a lot coming to you from championship weekend. Cannot wait. We'll talk to you guys later this week.